Work safety at steel construction. Steel construction involves the production process of every sort of steel construction, including the steel buildings. Steel stores, silos, boilers, roofs, bridges, and buildings are the topic of steel construction. Many of these productions and the productions performed in the factory have got the similar risks met at the operations of metal. In the first, second, and third parts of the module, the measures that can be taken to decrease these risks are mentioned. However, this situation is different for the steel buildings, which are amongst the productions to be performed on the construction site. It requires to work far from the conditions of workplace, by the heavy-duty machines high, and on the difficult conditions. Therefore, the work safety measures will be focused on the steel buildings existing amongst the steel construction productions in this part. Steel building is one of the building blocks of the large construction projects in our country and in the world. For the steel building production to become a large sector according to workplace and number of employees causes many work accidents and occupational diseases together to occur. This situation makes the measures to be taken concerning work health and safety at steel building production more important. In this part, O's, which should be regarded at producing steel buildings, will be discoursed by the development of technologies used at the production of elements of steel building. The quality and productivity of the sector of steel building have reached at a very advanced level. Steel building producers invest in the machines, providing technological advantage seriously in order to meet the needs of our structural steel sector. By means of the production projects drawn by computer and very low share of mistake, the steel productions, each element of which can be designed in detail, can be produced by the counters of in the environment of factory, but only their montage is carried out in the field of building. Production of steel buildings has got a workflow having more than one operation within. We had learned the OS measures that should be obeyed at the stage of the steel building elements in the previous subjects of the module. In this part, we will discuss the OS precautions to be obeyed while assembling the building elements at the construction field used at the production of steel buildings. Although constructing the steel building resembles the construction of reinforced concrete, carcass and wooden buildings, the big-scale steel building elements produced in the factory have also got differences, including the difficult stages like lifting, carrying, and montagging at the construction site. Lifting these materials in their places, carrying and montagging them should be performed by the experts having experience on these subjects. Preparing the mounting place. Establishment of scaffold. While constructing the buildings, the working places made for the workers to work in safety at the parts exceeding the normal working height in order to use temporarily are called scaffold. Scaffolds are divided into two groups as wooden and metal scaffolds according to the type of material built. On the other hand, they are named as tripod scaffold, post scaffold, pipe scaffold, hanging scaffold, moving scaffold, and supporting scaffold according to their using purpose. Scaffolds are usually used stroke down and erected again while constructing buildings short time. Therefore, it is demanded to strike it down easily and erect it for the materials to get used strong, to use it again at the same and similar works. Steel scaffolds are divided into three types between one another. Steel tripod scaffolds. It is used to perform, repair, mortar, cover the single-floor buildings, and to carry out the operations of installation works. The heights of tripods made of pipe or different shapes can be 80 to 100 centimeters, 80 to 150 centimeters if they are with adjusted heading, and their lengths can be between 100 to 200 centimeters. Steel bracket scaffolds. The scaffold that can easily set and disassembled or preferred to build, repair the multi-floor buildings and at the operations of external wall covering. Pipe scaffolds. The Pipe scaffolds made of the steel pipes are used to mount the side combining elements at the steel buildings, to mortar the external sides of the multi-floor buildings, to paint them, to cover them, etc. Since they can easily erected and stroke down in short time, safe, and as the material loss is little, they are preferred a lot nowadays. Suspensory rolling side scaffold. These scaffolds are usually used at the maintaining and repairing operations on the completed buildings. Its installation is short-term and economic. In this system, there is a platform where the workers can work comfortably, and there exist the motors which lower and lift this platform by the steel ropes around the buildings and move horizontally. The rail system having motor on that moves horizontally is set up on the terrace of the building. The most important characteristics of the scaffold is that it enables to work on the demanded level of floor. Moving scaffolds. At the simple works thinking that making scaffold takes long time and takes up space, moving scaffolds can be used as a practical solution way. All the workers have to obey the working instructions on the scaffold for a safe working, regardless of which scaffold type is chosen according to the steel building. Working instructions on the scaffold. Before the workers who work on this scaffold start to work, they have to control the timbers, rods, and the steel profiles. When there exists a problem on the scaffold, the concerned ones should be informed absolutely, and they shouldn't work till the problem is solved while mounting the scaffold, disassembling it, and working on the scaffold. The necessary personal protectors, helmet, glasses, safety belt, lifelines, work shoes, gloves, must be absolutely used. It mustn't be definitely worked high without tying the safety belts to the lifelines. Lifelines should be tied strongly to the independent places from the scaffold. Scaffold should never be climbed, and passing must be performed through the scaffold stairs or the available windows. Scaffold equipments, rods, safety clips, crosses should never be removed. Working shouldn't be performed on the timbers. The hooked original metal platforms of the scaffold should be used. Materials must never be thrown down from the scaffold, and their falling should be stopped. Passing under the materials hauled onto the scaffold must be stopped. Working shouldn't be carried out under the scaffold. Material bag must be used for the tools not to fall down. The electric appliances to be used on the scaffold must be grounded and protected in safety. Attachments should never be existed on the electric cables used on the scaffold. In the way there will be electrical leakage. Running, jumping, and joking should never happen on the scaffolds. Any materials and waste of materials shouldn't be left on the scaffold in the way they will hinder passing and safety. In order to stop the tools and materials falling down the floors of the scaffold, a 15 centimeters high wainscot must be put outside of the floor. There should be at least 1 centimeter space between wainscot and floor. The passes on the scaffolds as bridges mustn't be narrower than 60 centimeters. Furthermore, they also have railings. While carrying the metal platforms upstairs, at least 2 workers whose safety belts are tied should carry them, in case of using crane or similar machines near the scaffold. Measures must be taken for the load to lodge to the scaffold and cause the scaffold to fall down. Glass should absolutely be worn to protect the eyes. If the lighting is insufficient during the night working should never be performed. Ropes must be changed when they are worn. The ones who have got health problems and psychological problems should never work on the scaffold. Cigarette stubs should never be thrown down, and they shouldn't cause fire. The environments where there are burnable and inflammable materials should never be approached with cigarettes, and the tools glowing fire and sparkle. The possibility of the jacketing materials covering the spaces on the floor to get broken and removed should be considered, and it must be carefully worked. Everybody working high should be trained on education for working high. Assembly method. Since the production of project the steel buildings is performed in the factories or plants at the rate of 90%, only connecting the steel components, column, beam, purlin, rafter, components of wind and side connection and profiles, inserts, connection lathes, anchorage, screw, etc. Every sorts of materials are included, are performed at the building site. Assembling the steel components transported to the building site and packed in the correct way is performed by connecting with screw or welding. Welded connections are performed according to the crossing and situation workings of the steel rods to get connected with front end and overlap by using auxiliary lathes as the corner welding additions. However, it is usually preferred for the assemblies in the building site to be bolted. We can list the advantages of the bolted connection as follows. It is easy and fast. It doesn't require qualified worker. Assembly is performed in accordance with standards. It is easy to check the production and to correct the mistake. Assembly isn't affected by the weather conditions. Modification isn't required after the assembly. Nowadays, the steel structures are built in the factories according to the project by the full automatic machines, including all the operations like cutting, also including the geometrical figures, tapping, and welding, drilling, sandblast, painting, and giving item number. Projects are prepared in the way not requiring assembling in the building site as far as possible. Therefore, all the productions that should be made by welding are performed in the factories as welded connection, including all the components, connection parts like wind braces, purlins, rafters, etc. Main reason of it is that the quality of welding carried out in the building site isn't as good as the one performed automatically in the factory. For that reason, it is demanded at the steel buildings for the welding production in the building site to be in the minimum level. We can list the main drawbacks of the assembly welded in the environment of building site as follows. Drawbacks of assembly welded in the environment of building site. It requires qualified worker. Since welded assembly is more difficult than the bolted joint, production lasts longer than the bolted connection. It is difficult to keep the standard. Since the quality of the production welding will change according to the material used and team, its control is more difficult than the bolted connection. Convenient weather conditions required for the assembly. It is difficult to modify and repair it. The painting retrofit after the assembly should be performed carefully. Since the column, beam, purlin, rafter, wing connection rods, face connection components, and their connection parts prepared in the factories are put on the column and beam as welded, connecting them with screws and nuts is easily carried out. Completing all the productions to be performed with welding in the factories and plants according to applicability and budget of the project. And only assembling them with screws in the building site is the most important factor that increases the quality at the steel buildings. Preparation before assembly. Building firms should prepare different certificates about the steel components to get produced according to the application project before the assembly. The documents to be prepared are as follows. The production figures constituted based on the application projects, a work plan in accordance with the general work program, building site work program, before starting the work. The material approval form of the samples of the materials to get used from the material laboratories of universities or from the producer firms, procedures of welding and production, scaffold erecting report, and the list including the information of staff, machine, and equipment to be used should be prepared. Preparing the steel components and equipments before assembly. Application figures. Choosing the employees, preparing the materials, producing the steel components. Transporting them to the building site and assembling them should be performed according to the standards. Loading the materials, transporting, unloading and packing them must be carried out in the way not to damage the protective primer. The steel building components should never be thrown from the transporting vehicles. While carrying the steel building components and packing them, trusses and rays must be put and kept vertically. Their touching the soil must be avoided. Attention should be paid for the steel building components having water on. Horizontal and vertical wooden wedges must be used at the multi-lined hoards when it is examined as a sector. For the works of lifting heavy load and the ones performed gropingly being intensive make the preventability situation occurring at production of steel structure a little harder. However, the studies carried out indicates that most of the health and safety problems at the steel construction production are caused by using and keeping the machine, welding, cutting, bending, lifting load, moving the overhead and moving crane, and the painting operations. In order to eliminate the mentioned hazards, it should be acted convenient to the IO's regulations. In addition, using the special hand tools at the operations of machine, the measures like using the machine cases, avoiding the gases occurring at the cutting and welding operations, not overloading on the crane while lifting load, being sure that the chain and cables aren't tangled by any object must be taken. Together with these measures, using the necessary available individual protective equipment has got importance to avoid the accidents that can happen at producing steel construction.